What is this about our inability to touch the United States military and find cost savings there? Well, joining us to tell us is Carl Conetta, co-director of the Project on Defense Alternatives. Prior to joining PDA, Conetta was a research fellow at the Institute for Defense and Disarmament Studies. He served for 3 years as editor of the IDDS Journal of Defense and Disarmament Alternatives and the Arms Control Reporter. Carl Conetta, welcome back to News Talk Online on the Paltalk News Network.
My pleasure to be here.
You know, do you remember, I think you're old enough to remember the old Chevy commercial, Chevy, apple pie, the American way of life, kind of stealing from Superman? You don't want to mess with that.
Oh, yeah.
And you might as well throw the U.S. military in there as well, even if it's not for the good of the military. By golly, if it's a defense project, we're not going to cut it from the budget.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. You know, the military is the most revered institution in America. Polls year after year find that, and of course now, especially with wars ongoing, and in the shadow of the 9/11 attacks. There are strong emotions tied to the military, and I think for legitimate reasons. But there's more to it than that. Everybody has got a hand in. The defense budget has been large and growing, up 100% since 1998, and that's adjusted for inflation. This is a huge chunk of our spending. It's 50% of our discretionary budget. Entire industries have been built around this budget. And the armed forces, the Pentagon, have been very smart in distributing this money pretty evenly across congressional districts. So in just about every district, somebody is making money. So there are both pecuniary reasons as well as emotional ones. And then there are political reasons. This is the Pentagon budget. Military spending has been a political football for years now. It's been an albatross around the Democrats' neck because they've been tarred with the reputation of being weak on defense. And this is a real gift to Republicans who find it hard not to pursue along those lines, and essentially be there as stalwart supporters of the Pentagon, hitting at the Democrats. So it becomes a political lever, a way to win or lose at the polls. So there's a lot of reasons that this has tended to be a pretty entrenched area of the budget. What we've seen in the past few years, of course, with the economic crisis, is a lot more concern about debt and deficit. And, you know, this is true not just in government. It's true in all of our personal lives. I don't know if you've had the experience. I certainly have, going through the budget, my household budget, again and again and again, trying to find places to scale back because the country for 10 years has been living in a dream. We've based a lot of decisions on various economic bubbles. Essentially, the notion that we had more money to spend than we really did. The Pentagon certainly is not exempt from that problem, and in fact, it's the one U.S. agency. It's not only the largest U.S. agency; it's also the only one that has consistently been unable to pass an audit. In fact, it can't even stand for an audit. Its books are in such disarray that auditors don't know what to do with them. So here's an area where there should be real opportunities for cuts, but it's also an area that raises emotions, that people see as a political football, and that every congressional district has somebody making money off of that budget. Makes it tough to get it down.
Well, you know, let's talk about two examples, if we could, Carl Conetta, from the Project on Defense Alternatives, of the inability of both this Democratic administration and the previous Republican administration to remove from the budget funding for projects that the Defense Department, it says, both Republican and Democrat administrations, are unnecessary. There's a backup fighter jet engine that General Electric is developing in Ohio. Robert Gates, the Defense Secretary, calls it a, quote, unnecessary and extravagant expense, close quote. That's the project to which I referred earlier because it's adjacent in Ohio to House Speaker John Boehner's district. He says producing that backup engine encourages competition and a better product, so therefore he says, hands off, we're going to continue to fund it.
Well, sure. That example is repeated again and again. I mean, there are individual systems, especially with their earmarks that, in total the earmarks don't amount to that much, but every one of the procurement items in the budget has somebody fighting for it. And you certainly will have the Pentagon say, we don't need this particular thing, and nonetheless Congress will push it forward. You also have individual services developing their procurement lists more or less disconnected from each other. So when it comes to putting the budget together as a whole, there's always a question of overlap in missions, overlap in capabilities. But this is a political hornet's nest for the Secretary of Defense. It's important that he, as a political official, is trying to keep all of the services happy, which means that there's a lot of deference from the top to the individual services. And the way the machine keeps on working is you grease it with money. Basically, concede to things that you may not, in your better judgment, think the country needs, but it becomes a political decision. What's really needed here is that all of us, all citizens, need to look to a higher end, a higher goal. What we are really talking about is the preservation of our fundamentals of national strength for the long term. Not just this year's military budget or the military budget for the next 5 years, but really the source of our nation's strength looking 10, 20, and 30 years into the future. We're talking about the future of our nation, the future that our children will face. That has got to come first. But it's easy to say and it's hard to implement because in the final analysis you'll need to have representatives stand up and be willing to see some perk to their district disappear in order to move everybody forward towards a stable economy and a strong future.
Well, Carl Conetta, you said that as a politician, Secretary Gates has to kind of play to his other constituency, and those are the various branches of the service. But I cannot imagine that the Marine Corps, for example, is begging him to keep the expeditionary fighting vehicle, the EFV, and amphibious assault vehicle running. I believe that's the one that flipped out there during training in California and a Marine drowned. I don't think it's particularly the kind of armament that the Marines really want in their arsenal. And here you got Congressman Austria, a Republican in Ohio, where it's being also manufactured, saying, quote, I think it's necessary for our national defense. And Senator Brown, also of Ohio, saying, quote, in some sense, it's what makes the Marines the Marines. I mean, talk about hyperbole.
Well, I think in that particular case, actually, the Marines would like to see that system go forward. There's a lot of systems that fall into the category of being more expensive than we originally thought, less capable than we originally thought, and late in terms of delivery. This is a chronic problem with our modernization. The Government Accountability Office, again and again, every year, they essentially issue the same report, which says that an entire list of systems are far behind schedule, far over cost, far below desired capability. That's a problem with our defense industry and the interaction between government and industry because it's not a typical market system. It's not a system where there is strong competition. It's not a system where systems are thoroughly tested before purchase. And it's it's essentially a monopoly situation, and this leads to all sorts of distortions. That's a persistent problem. It doesn't mean the Marine Corps doesn't want that particular item. There are items that are forced down the service's throats. That's true enough. I wish the situation were simple enough to simply say, if we simply followed the service's desires, we'd be able to get the budget under control. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Everybody is going to be upset with the process of deficit reduction. It is a process that equals pain all around. And again, the only way to get through it is to keep in mind what the long-term goal is. The goal is not making a profit in the short term. The goal is not any particular military capability that we desire in the near term. The goal is preserving national strength 10, 20, 30 years into the future and more. Last year, there was a presidential bipartisan commission that was put together to take a look at the deficit problem, and there were a number of independent commissions that came together, and all tried to be more or less bipartisan, fair conservative participation as well as liberal participation. People came up with various plans, but the President's Commission, which was the official commission, took a look at discretionary spending and saw ways to cut $100 billion a year, up to $100 billion a year out of the Pentagon, and match that by cutting $100 billion from other areas of discretionary spending. As it turns out, the Pentagon is responsible for about 50% of our discretionary spending. So it was a pretty even-steven approach. People who participated and put those ideas together, the commission drew on various congressional research agencies who track these systems and these capabilities over the years. They put people to work saying, find ways to save this money. None of it is free of pain, and all of it involves some risk, whether you're talking on the military side or you're talking about health care. You're talking about accepting pain and accepting risk in order to keep the economy strong. So this proposal went forward, and it was pretty much 50-50. What we've seen in response, now that it's time to legislate, is that it is true that the Republican proposals on the floor tend to overlook the defense side, try to get everything out of the other side. We take a look at it's interesting, looking at the President's budget, there's also a tendency to soft pedal the Pentagon. Though Secretary Gates has found $78 billion that he's willing to cut over the next 5 years, 2012 through 2016. Now that $78 billion, that's about 2.5% of what the Pentagon would spend during that period of time. But the President's budget in total is pulling $200 billion out of discretionary spending. Now, if that were 50-50, it would be 100 from non-defense and 100 from defense. So what we see there, again, is a kind of shortfall on the Pentagon side of things. The Pentagon is the most powerful political institution in the United States. People don't want to touch it. The problem is that you look at the President's budget, and that $200 billion that he was able to pull out of discretionary doesn't come close to what the commissioners and the deficit hawks were looking at the end of last year. It goes about a quarter of the way for the cuts that people were looking for. So there's got to go back in there and find more. But as you try to cut deeper and deeper, it's going to get harder and harder to simply ignore the Pentagon.
The guest is Conetta. He is with the Project on Defense Alternatives, where he has served for quite some time now as the co-director.